My name is Thomas Brennan, and I'm going to tell you about the November evening that shattered my reality into 1,000 pieces, each reflecting a different lie my wife had been living for 3 years. I make my living as an architectural photographer in Denver. It's a profession that demands obsessive attention to detail. Every angle calculated, every shadow considered, every imperfection either hidden or highlighted, depending on the client's needs. I can spot a hairline crack in a foundation from 50 feet away. Notice when a supposedly straight wall is off by half a degree. This compulsive need for precision is what made me immediately notice the unfamiliar SD card in Rachel's coat pocket that Thursday evening. She'd borrowed my backup battery pack the night before for her phone. The hospital fundraiser had run longer than expected, and she knew I always kept spare power sources in my camera bag. I needed it for an early morning shoot the next day, documenting a newly renovated high-rise downtown. The developer was particular about capturing the building in the first light of dawn, when the glass facades would glow like amber. "Rachel, did you put my battery pack back?" I called upstairs, checking my equipment for the 5th time. Everything had to be perfect for tomorrow's shoot. "Check my coat pocket," she yelled back. I could hear the shower running, the bathroom fan humming. "Sorry, forgot to put it back in your bag." Her coat hung in our mudroom, a organized space I designed myself with custom cubbies for our shoes, hooks for coats, a small bench Rachel had insisted on for putting on boots. The coat still smelled like her perfume, something French and subtle she'd worn since our wedding day, mixed with the crispy November air and a hint of the hospital's antiseptic atmosphere that always clung to her clothes. I found the battery pack in the left pocket, but as I pulled it out, my fingers brushed against something in the right pocket, a small plastic SD card case, the kind professionals use to protect high-capacity memory cards from moisture and static. I knew every piece of equipment in our house. My studio downstairs was organized with military precision. Memory cards labeled by date and project, lenses arranged by focal length, cameras serviced on a strict schedule. This wasn't one of mine. All my cards were accounted for, sitting in their designated drawer. Rachel didn't own a camera beyond her iPhone. She'd always claimed to have no interest in photography despite my repeated offers to teach her. "Not everyone needs to see the world through a viewfinder, Tom," she'd say whenever I suggested she try it. "Some of us prefer to just experience things directly." Standing there in our mudroom, holding this unexpected piece of technology, I should have put it back, should have assumed it belonged to a colleague, something innocent she'd been asked to hold or return. But I've made a career out of noticing things that don't belong, and this SD card was screaming at me in frequencies only I could hear. I walked to my home office, a converted bedroom with calibrated monitors and professional editing equipment, and slid the card into my reader. The familiar chime of recognition sounded as my computer detected the storage device. 128 gigabytes, professional grade, the exact type I use for wedding shoots when I still did those. Expensive. Not something someone buys casually. The first image loaded on my screen and the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Rachel, laughing at a restaurant table, wearing a sundress I'd never seen, white with small blue flowers, the kind of dress that looked effortless but probably cost $300. The table was set for two, intimate lighting, clearly an expensive place, but it was the way she was looking at whoever held the camera that made my stomach clench. I'd photographed hundreds of couples over the years. I knew what love looked like through a lens. This was it. The metadata showed the photo was taken in Asheville, North Carolina, October 2021, 2 months after our wedding. But that October, Rachel had been at a wellness retreat in Boulder with her college roommates, Lisa, Patricia, and Donna. I remembered because I'd wanted to surprise her by showing up for the last day. Maybe take everyone out for a nice dinner. She'd talked me out of it. "It's really important that this stays just us girls," she'd said, kissing me on the cheek. "We're going to be doing some deep emotional work, talking about trauma and relationships. Having spouses there would change the dynamic." I'd understood, respected her need for space with her friends, felt proud that I was the kind of husband who didn't need to monitor his wife's every movement. My hands remained perfectly steady as I clicked through more images. Years of waiting for the perfect light, holding my camera still in impossible conditions, had taught me to control my physical responses, even when my emotional world was collapsing. The folder was labeled simply Asheville October. Inside were 87 photos spanning 3 days. Rachel at a farmer's market, holding up honey jars to the light. Rachel hiking a mountain trail, her hair pulled back in a way I'd never seen her wear it. Rachel in a hotel room, nothing explicit, but clearly comfortable, intimate, wearing a robe I didn't recognize in a room I'd never seen. I opened the next folder. Charleston, December. That was supposed to be her National Healthcare Administrators Conference. She'd complained about having to miss the company Christmas party for it, had brought back a stack of business cards and continuing education credits. But here she was on a historic home tour, wearing pearl earrings I hadn't given her, laughing at something behind the camera. The photographer, whoever they were, had captured her in moments of unconscious beauty. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the concentration on her face while reading a historical plaque, the joy in her eyes that I hadn't seen in our own photos for how long? Napa, February. Her mother's weekend that got canceled last minute due to illness. Rachel had gone anyway, said she needed to clear her head after a stressful period at work. I'd encouraged her to go, even upgraded her rental car as a surprise. In these photos, she was wine tasting, wearing a wedding ring that wasn't the one I'd placed on her finger. Different cut, different setting. As if she was married to someone else entirely. Montreal, May. The nursing symposium 6 months ago where she'd supposedly presented a paper on improving emergency room efficiency. She'd practiced that presentation for weeks in our living room, and I'd sat through it multiple times, offering feedback on her PowerPoint slides. But here she was at a jazz festival, wearing a red dress that would have made me fall in love with her all over again if I'd ever seen it. She was dancing with someone whose shadow appeared in several shots, but whose face never made it into frame. The photographer staying carefully, deliberately behind the lens. 17 folders. 17 weekends over 3 years, each containing between 80 and 200 photos. Professional quality images that showed an understanding of composition, lighting, emotional resonance. This wasn't casual documentation. This was someone chronicling a relationship they treasured. The technical details told their own story. Every photo was taken with the same camera, a Fujifilm X-T4, roughly $2,000 worth of equipment. The settings showed someone who knew what they were doing. Manual mode, careful attention to depth of field, custom white balance adjustments. The EXIF data included GPS coordinates, hotels I'd never heard of, restaurants we'd never visited together, hiking trails I'd never walked. But it was Rachel's face across all these images that truly destroyed me. She looked alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. In our wedding photos, which I'd personally edited, spending hours perfecting each image, she looked beautiful but contained, like she was posing for a formal portrait. In these photos, she looked free, uninhibited, like someone had finally seen her for who she really was. The jewelry was particularly damaging. Pieces I'd never seen her wear. An Art Deco bracelet that looked vintage and expensive, various rings she wore on different fingers, a locket that appeared in multiple sessions. Gifts from someone else, treasures from another life she valued enough to wear repeatedly but never in front of me. In one photo from Portland, August, she wore what was clearly an engagement ring on a chain around her neck, visible because she was leaning forward to blow out candles on a dessert. 2 candles, an anniversary of something that had nothing to do with me. The final folder was dated 2 weeks ago. Savannah, November. Rachel had gone to help her sister Linda after gallbladder surgery, had sent me regular updates about the recovery, even FaceTimed me from Linda's living room. But here she was in Forsyth Park, standing under the famous fountain in a white dress that looked almost bridal. The last photo in the set showed 2 hands holding each other, both wearing wedding bands that matched. Not a mock wedding, something more intentional, a commitment ceremony, a promise. Tom? Rachel's voice from the doorway made me jump. You okay? You've been down here a while. She stood there in my old Columbia University t-shirt and pajama pants, hair wrapped in a towel, looking exactly like the woman I'd married. Not the glowing, free creature in the photos. Just Rachel, my wife, concerned about why I disappeared into my office. Just reviewing some shots from today, I managed, my voice surprisingly normal. Years of dealing with difficult clients had taught me to maintain composure even when everything was falling apart. Technical issues with the white balance. Always such a perfectionist, she said, coming over to kiss my forehead. Her lips were warm, familiar. The same lips that had smiled for another photographer hundreds of times. Don't stay up too late. Remember, we have dinner with my parents Sunday. I'll be up soon. She padded back upstairs, and I heard our bedroom door close. Then I did what I'd been trained to do since my first photography class 20 years ago. I documented everything. I copied every file to an encrypted external drive, preserving all metadata. Created a spreadsheet cross-referencing dates with Rachel's supposed locations, our bank statements, her social media posts, my own calendar. The pattern emerged with devastating clarity. Her college roommates were real. Their social media confirmed they existed, lived in different states, occasionally gathered. But checking their posts against Rachel's trip dates showed they actually met only twice a year, always heavily documented on Instagram, with group photos and tagged locations. The monthly weekend trips were complete fabrications. The financial trail was clever but visible once I knew what to look for. Cash withdrawals for group expenses, spa treatments, restaurant deposits, shared hotel rooms. Always reasonable amounts, always with logical explanations. She'd return with souvenirs that seemed to prove her stories. Local honey from Boulder, hot sauce from Charleston, wine from Napa. Looking at our credit card statements now, I could see she'd ordered these items online, had them shipped to wherever she actually was, then brought them home as evidence of trips that never happened the way she claimed. By 3 a.m., I had enough evidence to confront her, to rage, to demand answers. But that felt insufficient. I needed to know who this photographer was, why she'd chosen this elaborate deception over simple divorce, how deep this betrayal went. I needed professional help. The next morning, Friday, I told Rachel I had an early shoot. Not entirely a lie, though. I finished it quickly and drove to a coffee shop in Aurora where no one would recognize me. Carlos Mendez came recommended through cryptocurrency forums as someone who could find information others couldn't, former NSA turned private sector. He looked like an accountant, mild-mannered, forgettable, wearing a Patagonia jacket that had seen better days. I need everything from this card, I said, sliding it across the table, including anything that's been deleted. Carlos pocketed the card without looking at it. Deleted files are usually recoverable unless they've been overwritten. What else? I need to identify the photographer. This serial number, I showed him a screenshot on my phone, and this shooting style. Photographers are easier to track than they think. They can't help posting their work even if they shouldn't. Timeline? No rush. I need thorough more than fast. 48 hours for the card, maybe 72 for the photographer. We agreed on payment in cryptocurrency, untraceable, clean. I drove back home, arriving just as Rachel was leaving for work. She kissed me goodbye, reminded me about dinner plans with friends that evening, asked if I could pick up wine. Red or white? I asked, playing the devoted husband. Let's do both. You know how Jennifer is about her Pinot Grigio. Jennifer and Mark, our couple friends who thought we had the perfect marriage. We'd been their witnesses at City Hall. They'd toasted us at our anniversary dinner just last month, said we gave them hope that marriage could work. That evening, sitting across from them at the restaurant, I studied Rachel with a photographer's eye. She performed our marriage flawlessly, laughing at my stories she'd heard dozen times, touching my hand at appropriate moments, referring to future plans that she apparently never intended to fulfill. Jennifer commented on how happy we looked. It's all about trust, Rachel said, squeezing my hand. When you have complete trust, everything else falls into place. I squeezed back, wondering if she could feel my pulse racing, if she noticed the slight tremor in my grip. Absolutely. Trust is everything. Carlos delivered ahead of schedule. Sunday morning, while Rachel was at her yoga class, or wherever she actually went on Sunday mornings, I received an encrypted file that changed everything. The deleted photos went back 4 years, before we'd even met. Rachel, with the same man, the same photographer, the same intimate gaze. The relationship hadn't started during our marriage. Our entire marriage had been inserted into their existing relationship. The photographer was Adrian Winters, based in Santa Fe. Landscape photographer, published, gallery represented. His official Instagram showed stunning environmental work, dramatically lit mountains and deserts. But the style was unmistakable. The same eye that captured wilderness also captured my wife. Adrian was married. His wife Margot was a novelist who spent months at writing retreats. Their marriage was described in interviews as unconventional but functional. They lived separately most of the year. The perfect cover for maintaining a parallel relationship. Further investigation revealed the connection point. 4 years ago, Adrian had been featured photographer at an artist residency in Taos. The administrative coordinator for that month-long residency was Rachel Mitchell, her maiden name. By the end of that month, according to the digital breadcrumbs Carlos helped me follow, they were inseparable. But Adrian was married, and Rachel was practical. She couldn't build a traditional life with a married artist living 500 miles away. So she'd done something else, created a double life that gave her stability and passion, security and adventure, a husband and a lover. The second phone was registered to the hospital, justified as emergency backup for on-call duties. Its location history, which Carlos extracted through methods I didn't ask about, showed her real travels. She'd developed a precise system: drive to Denver International, park in long-term parking to establish a travel record, take a rental car to Colorado Springs or Pueblo, where Adrian would pick her up for their real destination. Monday morning came with revelations that transformed cold anger into calculating rage. Carlos had found their communications, encrypted messages through an app designed for journalists in hostile territories. Thousands of messages over 4 years. But the most damaging discovery was something they called the 5-year plan. It was a shared document, detailed and specific. After 5 years of marriage to me, 2 more years from now, Rachel would request a divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She'd be generous in the settlement, asking only for personal possessions and enough to start over. She'd move to Santa Fe for a fresh start, where she'd randomly meet Adrian at a gallery opening. They'd fall in love for the first time, marry after an appropriate courtship, and live the artistic life they'd dreamed of. Adrian was following the same timeline with Margot, gradually making their unconventional marriage even more distant, setting precedent for an amicable separation when the time came. But it went deeper. They'd been building a business together, a luxury photography workshop company combining landscape photography with wellness retreats. Already incorporated in New Mexico, website built but hidden, investors identified. Rachel's administrative experience would handle operations while Adrian led the creative side. The weekends weren't just romantic getaways, they were test runs for their future business. The cruelty of specific instances hit me throughout that day. Our first anniversary, when she'd been stuck in Dallas for an emergency hospital accreditation. She'd been in Sedona with Adrian, photographing Cathedral Rock at sunrise. The weekend my father had his heart surgery, when she'd had to present at a crucial board meeting. She'd been teaching her first photography workshop with Adrian in Taos. My mother's funeral, which she'd left early from due to a crisis at work. Adrian's gallery opening in Austin was the same day. I sat in my office, surrounded by monitors showing the evidence of my wife's betrayal, and began planning something more than divorce. I wanted complete destruction of their plans, their business, their carefully constructed future. First, through the shell company Carlos helped me establish, I hired Adrian for a private photography workshop in January. Premium price, cash up front. Adrian eagerly accepted, not recognizing the company name or Carlos's assistant who made the booking. Then I began the psychological campaign. That evening, when Rachel came home from work, I met her with unusual enthusiasm. "I've been thinking," I said, pouring her wine. "We never travel together anymore. You're always going on these weekend trips alone. What if I started joining you occasionally?" Her hand stilled for just a moment as she reached for the glass. "That's sweet, but you know these are mostly work things or girl time with my friends." But not always, right? I mean, some of them must be flexible. Like next month's retreat. Maybe I could come for part of it? Drop you off, explore the area, pick you up? It's a silent retreat, she said quickly. Very strict about maintaining the atmosphere. No visitors, no exceptions. Even spouses? Especially spouses. The whole point is to disconnect from our daily lives and relationships to find inner clarity. I watched her construct the lie in real time, adding details to make it more believable. That makes sense, though I do miss you when you're gone so much. I miss you too. She kissed me, and I wondered if she'd kissed Adrian the same way 2 weeks ago in Savannah. Over the next weeks, I slowly increased the pressure. I'd casually mention how a client had raved about Santa Fe, suggesting we should visit together. I'd forward her articles about couples photography workshops, saying it might be fun to share a creative interest. I started showing up at her office occasionally for surprise lunches, making it harder for her to coordinate with Adrian during work hours. The stress began showing. She developed a slight eye twitch when I mentioned weekend plans. Started making small mistakes in her cover stories, claiming Lisa was attending a retreat that Patricia had supposedly organized, forgetting which conference was in which city. She began taking longer showers, hiding in the bathroom with her second phone, the water running to cover her conversations. Meanwhile, Carlos's investigation into Adrian revealed gold. This wasn't his first 5-year plan. He'd run the same scam twice before with married women in administrative roles who could provide stability while he built artistic ventures. Both previous partners, Patricia in Vermont, Diana in Oregon, had been left financially and emotionally destroyed when Adrian disappeared once the businesses were established. I contacted both women. Their stories were eerily similar to Rachel's. The secret weekends, the photography lessons, the workshop business plan, even mock weddings. They were eager to warn Rachel but had no way to reach her without going through Adrian, who'd blocked them everywhere. He made me feel like I was art come to life, Diana told me over video call, her voice still carrying pain 3 years later. Like I was his muse, his business partner, his future. I invested everything, my savings, my marriage, my faith in love itself. Then one day, he was just gone. New phone number, new city, new woman. The business we'd built together was suddenly his alone, and I had no legal recourse because I'd been hiding it all from my husband. Patricia's story was even worse. She'd actually divorced her husband for Adrian, only to have him disappear the week her divorce was finalized. He said Margot was the only obstacle to our happiness, but once I was free and she wasn't an excuse anymore, he vanished. Later, I learned he'd already started the same pattern with someone else. Diana, actually. For Rachel's 34th birthday in December, I presented my trap wrapped in expensive paper with a silver bow. I know how much you love your weekend travels, I said over dinner at her favorite restaurant. And I want to understand that part of your life better. So I've booked us something special. She opened the envelope, pulling out the workshop confirmation. A couple's photography workshop? In Santa Fe with Adrian Winters. He's supposed to be incredible, one of the best landscape photographers in the Southwest. Have you heard of him? Her face went through a transformation that would have been comic if it weren't so tragic. Shock, fear, rapid calculation, then forced enthusiasm, all in the span of 3 seconds. What a thoughtful gift, she managed, her voice only slightly strained. When is it? January 15th weekend. I already cleared it with your boss. Told him it was a birthday surprise. He said you haven't taken any personal time in months, so it's perfect timing. She couldn't refuse without revealing she knew Adrian. Couldn't warn Adrian without admitting she knew about the workshop. Couldn't claim to be busy without me knowing she was lying. The trap was perfect. This is really generous, Tom. Are you sure you want to spend a whole weekend doing photography? You do it all week for work. But this is different. This is about us sharing something. Plus, I've heard Santa Fe is beautiful in winter. We could extend it, make it a real vacation. Let's just stick to the workshop for now, she said quickly. See how it goes. That night, I pretended to sleep while she slipped out to the bathroom with her phone. I could hear her whispered, frantic conversation through the door, though I couldn't make out the words. When she came back to bed, she lay rigid beside me, staring at the ceiling. I matched my breathing to seem asleep, wondering if she was doing the same thing. The next 2 months were psychological warfare disguised as marital attention. I started couples therapy, claiming I felt disconnected in our marriage. I love Rachel completely, I told Dr. Patterson in our first session, Rachel sitting beside me on the beige couch. But sometimes I feel like we're living parallel lives, like we're roommates who happen to be married. That's not true, Rachel protested, taking my hand. We're building something together. Are we? I turned to face her directly. When's the last time we spent a full weekend together? Just us. No work. No friends. No separate plans. Dr. Patterson, unaware she was facilitating my psychological operation, asked Rachel about her weekend travels. Each session forced Rachel to elaborate on her lies, to perform concern and commitment while knowing that in 2 years she planned to leave. These friendships are important to me, Rachel explained during our third session. They predate our marriage. They're part of who I am. I'm not asking you to give them up, I said, playing the reasonable husband. I'm just wondering why I can't occasionally be included. Why there's such a wall between that part of your life and our marriage. There's no wall, she insisted, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes from maintaining the deception. I also orchestrated professional opportunities that conflicted with her Adrian weekends. Through anonymous recommendations, Rachel was invited to speak at prestigious conferences, offered board positions that met monthly, selected for committees that convened on Saturdays. She had to decline most of them, damaging her career advancement to protect her secret. Flowers arrived at her office from grateful patients, requesting to meet her on specific Saturdays. I had her nominated for a Hospital Administrator of the Year award with a ceremony on her planned February weekend. She had to choose between maintaining her cover and seeing Adrian, and each choice cost her something. Meanwhile, Carlos and I prepared for the workshop weekend. We hired actors to play other participants, Janet, who looked enough like Diana to be unsettling, Michael, a supposed tax attorney who would ask pointed questions about business structures, David and Sharon, a couple with a bitter divorce story centered on hidden assets and secret businesses. We also hired a professional videographer to document the workshop for marketing purposes. Adrian eagerly agreed, seeing it as free promotional content. Every moment would be captured in 4K resolution. As January approached, Rachel's behavior became increasingly erratic. She lost weight, developed insomnia, started making mistakes at work that she'd never made before. The strain of maintaining her double life while under scrutiny was breaking her down. "Is everything okay?" I asked one evening, finding her crying in the kitchen. "You seem stressed lately." "Just work stuff," she said, wiping her eyes. "Budget cuts, staffing issues. You know how it is at the end of the fiscal year. Maybe the workshop will be good for us. A chance to reset, do something creative together." She nodded, but I could see the trapped look in her eyes. She was caught between two worlds, and they were about to collide. The night before we left for Santa Fe, she tried one last time to escape. "I think I'm coming down with something," she said, coughing unconvincingly. "Maybe we should postpone." "I've got a whole pharmacy in my camera bag," I said, already packing. "Besides, it's your birthday present. We can't miss it. Adrian Winters only does a few workshops a year." She flinched at his name. "You really researched this guy, didn't you?" "Of course. I wanted to give you something special, something memorable." If only she knew how memorable it would be. The drive to Santa Fe took 6 hours. Rachel spent most of it pretending to sleep, occasionally checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I kept up cheerful chatter about the workshop, about Adrian's reputation, about how excited I was to learn from someone with such a unique vision. "His work is very emotional," I said, having memorized Adrian's artist statement. "He says he tries to capture the soul of the landscape, not just its appearance." "That sounds pretentious," Rachel muttered. "Maybe. But his photos are stunning. There's one series where he photographed the same mountain over 12 months, showing how light and seasons transform it. The patience that must have taken." "Some things aren't worth waiting for," she said quietly. "What?" "Nothing. Just thinking out loud." We arrived at the retreat center as the sun was setting, painting the adobe buildings gold. It was beautiful in that stark New Mexico way. all earth tones and endless sky. The kind of place where people came to find themselves or lose themselves, depending on what they needed. Adrian was in the main lodge, greeting participants. I'd grown a beard since the photos on my website, worn contacts instead of my usual glasses, adopted a slight southern drawl I'd learned from a client. Different enough that he wouldn't immediately recognize me. Similar enough that the reveal would be devastating. "Welcome," Adrian said, shaking my hand with the same hand that had held my wife's countless times. "I'm Adrian. You must be Tom. I'm so excited you're here, both of you." He was shorter than I'd expected, with the kind of carefully disheveled look that took effort to maintain. Expensive casual clothes, silver rings on multiple fingers, hair that was strategically messy. He had charisma, though. I could feel it immediately, the way he made you feel like you were the only person in the room. "This is my wife, Rachel," I said, putting my arm around her waist. "She's the reason we're here. Birthday present." Adrian's eyes flicked to Rachel for just a moment before his professional mask slipped back into place. "How wonderful. Birthday trips are the best kind." Rachel managed to nod, her body rigid under my arm. "Thank you for having us." "This is going to be an incredible weekend," Adrian said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I have some surprises planned that I think you'll really enjoy." The other participants arrived over the next hour. Janet immediately started asking Adrian about his previous workshops, mentioning she thought she recognized his style from somewhere. Michael steered every conversation toward business structures and tax implications. David and Sharon performed their roles as divorce veterans perfectly, peppering their introduction with warnings about mixing business with pleasure. "Our divorce taught us that transparency is everything," Sharon said during the welcome dinner. "Secret businesses, hidden assets, parallel lives, they always come to light eventually." Adrian's discomfort was subtle, but visible to someone looking for it. His usual charm felt forced, his stories more rehearsed than natural. He kept glancing at the door as if expecting someone else to arrive. "I've actually arranged for a guest instructor," he announced during dessert. "Someone who brings an operational perspective to complement the artistic side. She should be here tomorrow evening." Rachel went very still beside me. This wasn't part of their plan. Adrian had invited her to the workshop without telling her I would be here. That night, in our room, Rachel pretended to read while I reviewed the day's photos on my laptop. I'd taken hundreds of shots, Adrian teaching, the other participants practicing, the landscape around us. But I'd also captured moments Rachel didn't know about. Her reflection in windows watching Adrian, her hands clenched when he demonstrated a technique using another participant as a model, the way she unconsciously leaned toward him even while trying to stay distant. "He's talented," I said casually. "I can see why he's so successful." "I guess," Rachel replied, not looking up from her book. "Did you notice he's wearing a wedding ring? I wonder what his wife thinks about him traveling so much for workshops." "People have different arrangements," she said carefully. "Not everyone needs to be joined at the hip." "True, though I can't imagine being away from you that much. These last few years with your weekend trips have been hard enough." She finally looked at me then, something unreadable in her eyes. "You never said they were hard." "I didn't want to make you feel guilty for having your own life. But yeah, I miss you when you're gone. The house feels empty." For a moment, something shifted in her expression. Guilt, maybe, or regret. Then she turned back to her book. "I'm tired. Long drive today." We lay in separate beds that night. The room had two queens. And I wondered if she was awake too, staring at the ceiling, knowing that tomorrow everything would change. Saturday's workshop began with landscape composition basics. Adrian was genuinely talented as a teacher, breaking down complex concepts into understandable pieces. But the stress was affecting him. He kept losing his train of thought, repeating himself, forgetting participants' names. "Sorry," he said, after the third time he'd called Michael by the wrong name. "I'm a bit distracted today. Big surprise planned for tonight." "Surprises can be dangerous," David commented. "My ex-wife surprised me with divorce papers on my birthday." "This is a good surprise," Adrian insisted, but his smile was strained. That afternoon, we practiced what we'd learned, spreading out across the retreat center's grounds. I stayed close to Rachel, watching her try to photograph the landscape with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Here, I said, moving behind her to steady her camera. You're tensing up. Relax your shoulders, breathe normally. She was trembling against me, and not from the cold. I can't do this. Sure you can. It's just photography. Point and shoot. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? She turned to face me, and for a moment I thought she might confess everything. Then Adrian called out that it was time to review our shots, and the moment passed. The review session was painful. Adrian critiqued everyone's work, but when he got to Rachel's photos, he paused. These are actually quite good, he said, surprise evident in his voice. Have you photographed before? No, Rachel lied. Beginner's luck, I guess. You have a natural eye, he said, staring at her work. The composition, the way you've used the light, it's very sophisticated for a first-timer. My husband's a professional photographer, she said quickly. Maybe I've absorbed something through osmosis. Maybe, Adrian said, but his expression was suspicious now. He knew Rachel's skill level intimately. These photos were either too good or too bad to be real. Dinner was tense. Adrian kept checking his phone, clearly trying to reach his guest instructor. The other participants continued their psychological pressure. Janet asking about his business model, Michael discussing liability issues, David and Sharon sharing horror stories about relationships destroyed by deception. The worst part wasn't the affair, Sharon said, gesturing with her wine glass. It was discovering the depth of the deception, the secret credit cards, the hidden business ventures, the elaborate lies. Once you start pulling that thread, everything unravels. Some people are just natural liars, David added. They create these elaborate alternate realities and actually believe them. It's like they're living in parallel universes. Rachel excused herself, claiming she needed air. I watched her leave, then followed a few minutes later. I found her behind the building on her phone speaking in urgent whispers. You can't come here, she was saying. He's here, Tom's here. It's some kind of setup. No, I don't know how he knows. Just stay away. Please, if you ever cared about me, don't come. She hung up and turned to find me standing there. Who were you talking to? I asked calmly. Linda, my sister. Just checking on her recovery. It's been 2 months since her surgery. Seems like she'd be recovered by now. Complications, Rachel said, her lie reflexive. You know how these things go. I do know how things go, I said, stepping closer. I know about patterns and structures and how things that seem solid can be hollow inside. I know about facades and what they hide. Tom, you're scaring me. Am I? Or are you scared of something else? Before she could answer, we heard a car arriving. We walked back to find Adrian greeting his guest instructor. Except it wasn't who we expected. Carlos had intercepted the real instructor with a generous payment to stay home, and Janet had taken her place, introducing herself with a different name but a familiar face that made Adrian step back in shock. Diana? He said, then caught himself. I mean, you look like someone I used to know. I get that a lot, Janet said smoothly. One of those faces, I guess. Shall we discuss the curriculum for tomorrow? The evening dissolved into chaos disguised as workshop activities. Janet asked increasingly pointed questions about Adrian's past teaching experience. Michael brought up tax implications of running workshops while married without spousal consent. David and Sharon shared more stories about deception and its consequences. Rachel sat frozen through it all, realizing something was very wrong, but not understanding the full scope. Adrian tried to maintain control, but he was rattled, making mistakes, contradicting himself. I think we should call it a night, he finally said. Big day tomorrow. Before we do, I said, standing up, I have something to share. I've been studying Adrian's work and I'm fascinated by his portrait photography. It's not on his website, but I found some examples online. I connected my laptop to the presentation screen, supposedly to show my own work. Instead, Rachel's photos filled the screen. Asheville, Charleston, Napa, Montreal, Portland, Savannah. These are beautiful, I said conversationally. The emotional connection between photographer and subject is remarkable. You can really see the intimacy, the trust, the love. Rachel's gasp was audible. Adrian stood frozen. The other participants leaned forward with practiced interest. The metadata is particularly interesting, I continued, clicking through to show the EXIF data. Every photo tagged with dates and locations, a comprehensive record of a relationship spanning years. Tom, Rachel whispered, please? Please what? Please don't show the mock wedding photos. Please don't reveal the 5-year plan. Please don't mention the workshop business you're starting together. I clicked to the Savannah photos. Rachel in her white dress. The exchanged rings. The ceremony that made a mockery of our actual marriage. The most interesting thing, I said, my voice still calm, professorial, is that this isn't Adrian's first 5-year plan. Diana, the real Diana, appeared on screen via video call, along with Patricia. They told their stories while Adrian tried to leave and Rachel sobbed. The complete pattern was revealed. The seduction, the business plan, the abandonment once the venture was established. Rachel, you're not special, Patricia said through the screen. You're just the 3rd iteration of his scam, maybe the 4th. He'll leave you once the business is profitable, just like he left us. That's not true, Adrian finally spoke, his voice cracking. Rachel, don't listen to them. What we have is real. Is it? I asked. Like what you had with Diana was real? With Patricia? How many other 5-year plans are you running right now? Michael stood up. From a legal perspective, this is fascinating. The tax implications alone. Shut up, Adrian snapped, his composure finally breaking. All of you just shut up. This is insane. Tom, I don't know what you think you know. I know everything, I interrupted. Every weekend, every lie, every detail of your plan. I know about the business incorporation in New Mexico. I know about the investors you've approached. I know about Rachel's secret Instagram where she's been building her photography reputation. I turned to Rachel. I know about the second phone. The fake fertility struggles when you've had an IUD the entire time. The way you left my mother's funeral early for his gallery opening. Oh my God, Sharon said with perfectly feigned shock. Your mother's funeral? Rachel was sobbing now, mascara streaming down her face in black rivers. Tom, let me explain. Explain what? How you've been living a complete double life for 3 years? How our entire marriage has been a performance while you built a real life with him? How you were planning to divorce me in 2 years and pretend to randomly meet Adrian in Santa Fe? You don't understand, she said desperately. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You're right. It was supposed to be secret. You were supposed to deceive me for 2 more years, then leave with a generous settlement to start your new life. But you got sloppy. You left his SD card in your coat. Adrian's face went white. You took my card? I wanted copies, Rachel admitted quietly. Of the Savannah photos, our commitment ceremony. I wanted something that was mine. And that greed destroyed everything, I said. Your workshop business? I've contacted all your investors. They're pulling out. Margot? She's on her way here with her lawyer. Turns out she's been documenting your absences for years, planning her own exit. You just gave her the ammunition for a fault-based divorce. This is defamation, Adrian said weakly. I'll sue you for everything. With what money? I asked. After Margot's done with you? After Patricia and Diana's lawsuits go through? Oh, you didn't know they were suing. They filed last week. I turned back to Rachel. The divorce papers will be filed Monday. Adultery with full documentation. Colorado is an equitable distribution state, and adultery affects that equity. You'll get exactly what you brought into the marriage. Your student loans and your car. You can't do this, she whispered. I can and I will. Your hospital has also been informed about your use of company resources for personal business. The second phone, the fraudulent expense reports when you claimed some trips were professional development. You'll be terminated Monday. Tom, please, I love you. No, I said, feeling strangely calm. You love the stability I provided while you played artist with him. You love the cover story our marriage gave you. But you don't love me. If you did, you wouldn't have been capable of this level of deception. Adrian tried one last manipulation. Rachel, don't let him do this. We can fight this. What we have, what you have is a pattern of fraud, Janet interrupted, dropping her fake persona. I'm actually a private investigator. Everything tonight has been recorded. Your history of targeting married women, getting them to invest in businesses, then disappearing. It's all documented. The workshop ended there, in chaos and tears and threats of lawsuits. Adrian tried to leave, but Margot arrived with her lawyer and a court order freezing their assets. Rachel collapsed, requiring medical attention from the retreat center staff. The videographer captured it all, creating a record that would circulate through professional photography circles for years. The drive home was silent. Rachel had ridden back with me because she had no other option. Adrian was dealing with Margot, her sister Linda, when finally actually contacted, was horrified and refused to help. Her parents were in shock from the photos I'd sent them. We stopped once for gas. While I pumped, Rachel sat in the car, staring at nothing. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a photograph that had been overexposed and lost all its depth. Why? She finally asked as we entered Denver. Why did you have to destroy everything? I didn't destroy anything. I just exposed what was already there, like developing a photograph. The image already exists on the film. I just brought it to light. You destroyed my future. No, you destroyed our present for a future that was never going to happen. Adrian's done this before. He would have left you eventually, probably for someone younger, someone with more resources to exploit. You don't know that. Patricia knows it, Diana knows it, and deep down you know it too. Why else would you have taken that SD card? Some part of you knew you needed proof, evidence that it had been real, because you suspected it might all disappear. She didn't answer. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. By Monday, the story had spread through Denver's professional circles. Rachel was terminated from the hospital with cause, making her ineligible for unemployment benefits. Her photography Instagram was banned for terms of service violations. She'd been selling prints of locations where Adrian held commercial rights. The divorce proceeded exactly as I'd outlined. Rachel's court-appointed attorney, looking at the evidence, advised her to accept my terms. She received her Honda Accord and her personal clothing. Nothing else. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, all mine. Adrian's situation was worse. Margot's divorce lawyer was brilliant and ruthless. Using my evidence plus years of her own documentation, she took him for everything. The Santa Fe house, the photography equipment, future royalties from his published work. She also revealed something that shocked even me. Adrian had been sterile since a teenage injury. All his promises to Rachel about children, about their future family, had been lies. Patricia and Diana's lawsuits succeeded. Adrian was forced to liquidate his remaining assets to pay damages. His gallery dropped him. His publishers canceled upcoming books. His workshop venues blacklisted him. Within 3 months, he'd fled to Mexico, teaching beginner photography to tourists for cash. Rachel moved to a studio apartment in Aurora, finding work as a night shift data entry clerk. It was the only job that didn't require references, the only place where her story hadn't spread. She tried to start over in other cities, but the photography world is smaller than it seems. Her story followed her. The hospital administrator who'd lived a double life, who'd been exposed at her lover's workshop by her own husband. 6 months after the divorce, she sent me a letter. Tom, you want to know the truth? Here it is. I felt invisible in our marriage. You photographed buildings with more attention than you ever showed me. You could spot a hairline crack in concrete from 50 feet, but you couldn't see that I was dying inside. Adrian saw me. Not as your wife, not as an administrator, but as an artist. He taught me to see light and shadow, to capture emotion in a frame. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was creating something beautiful. Yes, I lied. Yes, I deceived you. But I was also deceiving myself, believing that I could have both lives, that I deserved both stability and passion. You're right that Adrian would have left me eventually. The other women's stories prove that. But for 3 years, I felt alive. You didn't just expose my deception. You destroyed my only chance at being something more than someone's wife or someone's employee. You took my attempt at art and turned it into evidence. You took my search for identity and turned it into a crime. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding. I just wanted you to know that while you were documenting the architecture of our marriage, I was trying to build something of my own. The fact that I built it on a rotten foundation doesn't make the impulse wrong, just the execution. I hear you're dating someone new. I hope you see her more clearly than you saw me. I hope you photograph her with the same attention you give your buildings. I hope she never feels invisible enough to need a secret life. Rachel. I burned the letter, but her words haunted me. Was she right? Had I been so focused on technical perfection that I'd missed the emotional imperfection of our marriage? Had my obsession with documenting structures blinded me to the human element? I started therapy. Real therapy, not the weaponized version I'd used against Rachel. Dr. Kim, recommended by my physician, specialized in betrayal trauma. Through months of sessions, patterns emerged that I hadn't wanted to see. You documented your revenge as carefully as you document buildings, Dr. Kim observed. Every angle covered, every detail captured. But what about the emotions? What did you feel when you found those photos? Anger. Betrayal. Before the anger, in that first moment, I thought back to standing in the mudroom, seeing Rachel's laughing face in that Asheville restaurant. Hurt. Devastating hurt. Like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my chest. But you immediately converted that hurt into action, into investigation and planning and revenge. You never actually processed the pain. She was right. I'd buried the emotional damage under layers of strategic planning, turned my heartbreak into a project to be managed. It was easier to destroy Rachel and Adrian's future than to mourn the death of what I'd thought was our present. A year after the workshop, I received unexpected news through professional channels. Adrian had been arrested in Mexico for running the same scam on wealthy expatriate women. This time, one victim's husband had cartel connections. Adrian was sentenced to 20 years in Mexican prison, where his artistic vision meant nothing and survival required skills he'd never developed. Rachel, hearing about Adrian's arrest through whatever network she still had, finally understood the full scope of how she'd been manipulated. According to a mutual acquaintance who reached out to me, she attempted suicide, was hospitalized, and eventually diagnosed with severe depression and complex PTSD. She'd discovered that her entire parallel life, the thing she'd sacrificed everything for, had been just another iteration of Adrian's con game. I felt nothing, or thought I felt nothing. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her in that hospital, realizing that every intimate moment with Adrian had been scripted, that every promise had been part of a pattern he'd refined over years of practice. The devastation she felt now must be similar to what I'd felt finding those photos, except worse, because she'd chosen the lie while I'd had it forced upon me. 2 years after the divorce, I met Sarah at a forensic accounting conference. She'd been hired to trace hidden assets in a complex divorce case and needed photography documentation. We bonded over our shared need for evidence, for documentation, for truth that could be proven rather than felt. I investigate financial fraud, she said on our first real date. You investigate structural integrity through photography. We're both in the business of revealing truth. That's a romantic way to put it. Romance doesn't have to mean deception, she said. It can mean radical honesty, complete transparency. We developed something careful and real. Every dinner receipt saved, every text message archived, every milestone photographed. It sounds clinical, but there was comfort in the transparency. No hidden weekends, no secret credit cards, no parallel lives. You know I'm tracking all your expenses, Sarah told me after 6 months. I know. I'm photographing all our dates. Why? Evidence that something real existed. Proof that we were here, together, without filters or facades. She understood in a way others wouldn't. We were both damaged by deception, both needing verification, both unable to trust without documentation. It wasn't traditional romance, but it was honest. Last month, 3 years after finding the SD card, I ran into someone from Rachel's hospital. She told me Rachel had moved to Kansas, working as an administrative assistant at a community college. She'd given up photography entirely, couldn't even look at cameras without anxiety attacks. She wanted me to tell you something if I ever saw you, the woman said hesitantly. She said she understands now that the person she was trying to become with Adrian wasn't real either. It was just another performance, another role. She said the only authentic thing she ever did was leave that memory card where you could find it. I thanked her and continued with my day, but the words stuck. Had Rachel subconsciously wanted to be caught? Was the forgotten card a deliberate breadcrumb? A cry for help from someone drowning in their own deception? That evening, I went to my safe and pulled out the SD card. I hadn't looked at it since the divorce, but I'd kept it. Evidence of a crime, artifact of a marriage, proof that something had existed even if it wasn't what I'd thought. I loaded the photos again, this time looking with different eyes. Not the eyes of a betrayed husband or an avenging angel, but the eyes of a photographer trying to understand composition. Rachel looked genuinely happy in these photos. Not the performed happiness of our social media posts or family gatherings, but something deeper. But looking closer, I could see the strain too. Dark circles makeup couldn't quite hide, tension in her shoulders even while laughing. The exhaustion of maintaining multiple realities. In one photo from Montreal, she was looking directly at the camera, at Adrian, but her eyes were somewhere else. Lost, maybe, or searching for something even he couldn't provide. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. What were they doing awake at that hour? Running from insomnia? Unable to sleep in their stolen time together? There was a photo I hadn't noticed before, buried in the Portland folder. Rachel alone, sitting on a hotel bed, still in the clothes from whatever they'd done that day. She was looking at her phone, probably at a message from me, checking in, asking about her weekend. Her face showed such profound sadness that it took my breath away. This wasn't the face of someone reveling in deception. This was someone trapped between two inadequate lives, unable to fully exist in either. I closed the files and returned the card to the safe. Whatever Rachel's motivations, whatever her pain, it didn't excuse the deception. But maybe understanding it could help me heal the parts of myself that had been damaged by both the betrayal and my response to it. Sarah found me in my office that night, staring at nothing. "Looking at old photos?" she asked, knowing me well enough to recognize the signs. Looking at old perspectives, trying to understand what I missed. You can't photograph what someone deliberately hides. No, but I could have paid attention to what was visible. The exhaustion, the distance, the performance. I was so focused on technical perfection that I missed the human imperfection right in front of me. She could have talked to you, gone to counseling, asked for a divorce. She had options besides deception. She did, and I had options besides destruction. Sarah sat beside me, taking my hand. You did what you needed to do to survive. I did more than survive. I annihilated. There's a difference between exposing deception and orchestrating complete destruction. Do you regret it? I thought for a long moment. I regret that it was necessary. I regret not seeing the cracks in our foundation before they became catastrophic. I regret turning my pain into a weapon. But no, I don't regret exposing the truth. Then learn from it and move forward. That's all any of us can do. She was right, of course. The past was fixed, developed, printed, but the future was still being composed, still being framed, still waiting for the right light. 5 years after finding the SD card, the exact timeline of Rachel and Adrian's plan, I received a final communication. A postcard from Nebraska, no return address. The image showed a wheat field at sunset, the kind of generic Midwest beauty that could be anywhere or nowhere. On the back, in Rachel's handwriting, just 4 words. You were right, thanks. I photographed it, filed it with the divorce papers, and went back to work. Buildings still needed documenting. Structures still needed analyzing. Truth still needed revealing. But now I photographed differently. I captured not just the perfect angles, but the imperfect ones too. Not just the solid structures, but the developing cracks. Not just the facades, but what they concealed. Sarah and I got married last spring. Small ceremony, thoroughly documented, radically transparent. We wrote our own vows, promising not perfection but honesty, not performance but presence. The photographer we hired specialized in candid shots, catching moments between poses, finding truth in transition. Looking at our wedding photos now, I see the difference. We look tired in some, awkward in others, occasionally distracted or uncomfortable. But we also look real, present. Like two people who know the weight of deception and choose transparency instead, who understand that love isn't about perfect lighting but about seeing each other clearly in whatever light exists. The SD card still sits in my safe, a reminder of how elaborate deception can be and how small the crack that reveals it. Sometimes I think about destroying it, but that feels like trying to delete history. It happened. Rachel and Adrian's parallel life, our hollow marriage, the spectacular collapse, all of it happened. The evidence matters, not as a trophy or a wound to pick at, but as proof that I survived something that could have destroyed me differently. Recently, I've been teaching photography workshops myself. Not the kind Adrian taught, promising transformation and artistic revelation, but practical sessions on architectural documentation. How to capture truth through a lens. How to see what's really there, not what you want to see. How to document both the beauty and the decay, because both are part of the story. One student asked me why I emphasize capturing flaws so much. Because perfect structures don't exist, I told him. Everything has cracks, wear patterns, places where the facade doesn't quite meet the foundation. If you only document the perfection, you're creating fiction. If you document the complete truth, beauty and damage together, you're creating art. He nodded as if this made sense, but I could see he didn't fully understand. Most people don't, until they've had their own perfect structure collapse, until they've found their own SD card in a coat pocket, until they've discovered that the life they thought they were living was just one layer of a much more complex image. The truth is, we're all living parallel lives to some degree. The person we are, at work, with family, with friends, alone at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling. The difference is whether those parallel lives complement or contradict each other, whether they're variations on a theme or completely different songs. Rachel chose complete separation, building walls between her lives that required constant maintenance and ultimately couldn't hold. I chose willful blindness, focusing so intently on one aspect of our marriage that I missed all the others. We were both architects of our own destruction, just using different blueprints. But that's the thing about destruction. Sometimes it's necessary for rebuilding. The marriage I thought I had with Rachel needed to be demolished because it was built on false foundations. The future Rachel imagined with Adrian needed to be exposed because it was based on lies. The people we were, the deceiver and the deceived, needed to die for us to become whoever we are now. I don't know who Rachel has become in Kansas, whether she's found peace or just resignation, whether she's rebuilt or just surviving. I hope she's found something real, something that doesn't require performance or deception, something that can withstand examination in any light. As for me, I've learned that the most important photographs are often the ones never taken. The moments too raw for documentation, too real for careful composition. The Tuesday evening when nothing happens except two people existing honestly in the same space. The Sunday morning with bad light and worse coffee, but genuine laughter. The accumulation of small truths that, over time, build something that doesn't need a facade because the structure itself is solid. Sarah just brought me coffee, kissing my forehead as she passed. A simple gesture, undocumented, unperformed. No hidden meaning, no parallel narrative, no secret life. Just a woman bringing coffee to her husband on a quiet Thursday evening. Both of us exactly where we claim to be, exactly who we claim to be. That's the photo that matters. Not the ones on the SD card, not the ones from my revenge, not even the ones from our wedding. Just this moment, uncaptured but real, proving that sometimes the best evidence of love isn't what you document, but what you don't need to. The SD card remains in the safe, a digital fossil of a marriage that existed in multiple dimensions, none of them entirely true. But truth, I've learned, isn't about perfection. It's about alignment, making sure all your parallel lives are heading in the same direction, toward the same light, developed with the same honesty. Tomorrow I have a shoot, a historic building that's being renovated. its facade stripped away to reveal the original structure beneath. The owners want to document both the decay and the restoration, the damage and the healing, the lies the building has told and the truth it's becoming. I'll photograph it all, every angle, every crack, every place where the old and new meet imperfectly but honestly. And then I'll come home to Sarah, who'll ask about my day, and I'll tell her the truth, the whole truth, not a performed version or a parallel narrative, but the actual, mundane, beautiful truth of spending a day documenting how things fall apart and come together, how structures that seem solid can be hollow, and how sometimes the most important thing isn't the facade, but what it's been hiding. That's my story. A man who found an SD card and destroyed a marriage, who orchestrated perfect revenge and learned imperfect forgiveness, who documented everything except what mattered most until it was too late to capture it. But it's also a story about reconstruction, about learning to see with naked eyes instead of through a lens, about building something new on ground that's been scorched but cleared, foundations that have been tested by truth rather than hidden by performance. The SD card will stay in my safe, probably forever. Evidence of a crime, artifact of a marriage, reminder that the most elaborate deceptions can be undone by the smallest oversights. But I don't need to look at it anymore. I know what it contains. Proof that my wife loved someone else, that our marriage was a performance, that parallel lives eventually intersect in devastating ways. More importantly, I know what it doesn't contain. The quiet moments when Rachel and I were actually happy before the performance began, the Sunday mornings before she met Adrian, the laughter that was real before it became rehearsed. Those moments existed too, even if they weren't documented, even if they were overwhelmed by what came after. That's the paradox of photography and memory. We can only capture what's there in the moment, but meaning changes with time and context. The photos on that SD card show Rachel happy with Adrian, but now I know that happiness was built on deception. Our wedding photos show us making vows, but now I know she was already planning to break them. Today's photos with Sarah show us building something new, but someday they might reveal things I can't see yet. All we can do is try to be honest in the moment, to align our parallel lives as much as possible, to build structures that can withstand scrutiny from any angle. Sometimes we'll fail. Sometimes the facade will crack and reveal something hollow beneath. Sometimes we'll find SD cards in coat pockets that change everything we thought we knew. But sometimes, if we're careful and honest and lucky, we'll build something real. Something that doesn't need perfect lighting or careful angles because it's solid from every perspective. Something that can survive the small oversights and accidental revelations because there's nothing hidden to reveal. That's what I'm trying to build with Sarah. That's what I hope Rachel finds in Kansas. That's what we all deserve. Even those of us who've deceived and been deceived, who've destroyed and been destroyed, who've performed so long we've forgotten what's real. The truth, like a photograph, develops slowly. Sometimes you don't see the complete picture until years later, when the chemicals have finished their work and the image has fully emerged. Looking back now, I can see things I missed. Rachel's exhaustion from maintaining her deception, Adrian's practiced manipulation, my own blindness to anything that didn't fit my perfect frame. But I can also see the courage it took for Rachel to leave that SD card where I could find it, even if it was unconscious. The strength it took to sit through that workshop weekend as everything collapsed. The resilience we've both shown in rebuilding from rubble. Not forgiveness exactly, not reconciliation. Just acknowledgement that we were both flawed architects building impossible structures that were always destined to collapse. The only difference is that I documented the demolition while she lived through it. It's been 5 years, 7 months, and 12 days since I found that SD card. I know because I documented it, photographed it, preserved it like evidence of a crime. But it was also evidence of a marriage, proof that something existed even if it wasn't what I thought. And maybe that's enough. Not the fairy tale we pretended to live, not the parallel lives we actually lived, but the simple fact that we lived them, documented them, and survived their collision. Tomorrow is another Thursday. I'll wake up beside Sarah, who knows about the SD card but has never asked to see it. We'll have coffee and talk about our days ahead, her fraud investigations, my architectural shoots. We'll kiss goodbye without wondering where the other is really going. We'll text during the day without suspicion or performance. We'll come home to each other because that's where we actually want to be. It's not a perfect life, but it's an honest one. And after everything, the deception and revelation, the destruction and reconstruction, honesty is the only architecture worth building.